All right. Welcome everyone to our Cognitive Distortions webinar / workshop. It's not going to be interactive, but I'm calling it a workshop because as I go through this topic today, I am going to walk through a number of exercises and activities and really explain how to use them because I will be sharing these out afterwards so that you can use these at home with your children if cognitive distortions is something they have been struggling with. Let me turn this into a slideshow. All right, so my name is Jessica Ragnio. I am a clinical social worker and I'm the Associate Clinical Director at Mightier. We have been doing a number of these webinars recently, playing around with different topics. At the end of this, I'm gonna share my email because if you have different things like ideas, like, hey, my child has been struggling with this, I would really like some activities or information on it, let me know. We might have something built out already, or it just adds to our planning as we want to continue this series and all of our activities and additional programming that we're building into the Mightier experience. So today, again, we're talking about cognitive distortions. If you are a Mightier family, if you've been with us for a while, you know we like to wrap everything up in a metaphor, a game, a story. We want to make it fun. We want to make it more engaging for kids. So we're going to recall our cognitive distortions, sort of like thought awareness and reframing activities, our weeds in the garden unit. So today we're going to be talking a lot about gardens, talking about plants, talking about weeds in the garden. All right, so let's get started. Our agenda today, we're going to start with just some basic cognitive behavioral therapy, like an introduction here to the connection between our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. We're going to deep dive that a little bit. And then we're going to go into these layers of learning. And this is, I think, how understanding and working with our thoughts works anyways. These are sort of the layers you have to build up. It is also how the activities are going to be delivered if you do want to work on this with your child. So next step is just I have helpful and unhelpful thoughts. How do I understand the difference between those? How do I tell them apart? Why do I care? Why do I care about helpful versus unhelpful thoughts? So getting there, we're going to look at the cognitive distortions. We're going to look at these are named things. These are very common cognitive experiences for all of us to have. So we're going to take a look at those, try to understand them. Where did they come from? We're going to look at some cognitive reframing exercises. We're going to look at some tools, basically, to understand how do we use these strategies, and then some ways to practice using them. We're going to do a little leveling story, and I'll show you a game that you can use at home. There is a thought tracking exercise in this. In cognitive behavioral therapy, almost everything, you would always do mood tracking, you would always do thought tracking. We're trying to make that a little more fun for kids, a little easier to access. So I have something there to share, and then I will just give you a glimpse of what this Weeds in the Garden activity pack looks like, and which I will be sharing with you all after the webinar. So, all right, let's get started. So first, we're going to start with the basics, that taking a look at how our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors are connected. Now, this is really important, one, for building emotional awareness and just understanding ourselves. When I feel this way, I tend to think these sorts of thoughts and I tend to act in this sort of way. That's really important for self-awareness. It is also important for interventions. We'll get to that in a second. But let me give some examples of this first. So if you think of a time that you were feeling really excited about something, there's an event coming up, you've been looking forward to this, and it's in a few hours. The thoughts running through your head are most likely pretty positive thoughts, right? You're thinking about all of the great things that you're looking forward to. You're probably thinking about people that you're going to see, conversations you might have, right? So your thoughts are reflecting this excitement that is your emotional state. And then your behaviors are connected to these things as well. You're probably energetic. You might be moving around a lot. You might be more talkative, right? So you can see how there's that connection between these three things. Now, let's think about a moment of sadness when you are feeling something has happened, you're feeling incredibly sad about this. Your thoughts are most likely not very positive right now, right? Like they are probably they might be in a negative space. You might be thinking fairly hopeless thoughts, right? Your thoughts are reflecting the sadness that is your emotional state. And then behaviorally, you might be pretty low energy. You might be less talkative. You might be isolating. You might be more likely to like be laying in bed or like sitting on the couch, right? You can see how all these things are connected. This plays out for anger as well. When we're feeling really angry about something, our thoughts tend to be pretty stuck on the thing that we're angry about. Like we're pretty like focused on it. And behaviorally, like we might be like tense. We all might act differently in anger, right? Like there might be a punching of the wall. There might be screaming. There might be like totally shutting down, like can't communicate because I'm so angry, right? This plays out differently for everyone, but the point is that thoughts, behaviors, and emotions are connected. Now, when it comes to intervention, and when we are talking about like a person or a child who is struggling with anger, struggling with anxiety, struggling with sadness, let's think about how we can change that. Because if I were to say right now, like, think of a time someone like made you feel really appreciated. Think of a time that you felt really proud of yourself. Like you could conjure up those thoughts right now. If I were to say, jump up and down right now, go for a walk, go give someone a hug, like you could get yourself to physically go and do that. You could make that choice. You could take that action. If we were in person, like I probably would ask you to do that. But if I say, feel happy now, feel sad now, calm down now, don't be angry. Like it doesn't work like that, right? We see that play out for our kids when they're stuck in that emotion, and you can't just flip a switch and get that emotion, that tough emotion to stop for them, right? So thoughts and behaviors are our access points. And if you're a Mightier family, you can see how like as your child is playing Mightier, they're really working on the emotional behavioral connection. As they wear that heart rate monitor and play the games, they are practicing the behavior of emotional regulation. Like they are taking deep breaths, right? They are bringing their heart rate down. They are taking these actions to sort of calm themselves down, and that is impacting their emotional state as they play. So it's really focused there as they're playing the Mightier video game. We're going to focus today completely on the thought, well, almost completely on the thought emotion connection. All right, so first we're going to start with an example of that. This is like an adult example. Your in-laws, they're visiting for a weekend, and you overhear them talking between themselves, but like in front of you, about all the potential ways that their grandchildren, your children, could get hurt, injured in your home. This is definitely from my life, but in this situation, if anyone else has experienced this, the immediate emotions that you might feel, or that I feel in this moment, are like immediately defensive, annoyed, anxious, angry, stressed, right? Like automatic emotions going on in my body. The thoughts, they think I'm a bad parent, probably some questioning, like, am I a bad parent? Did I miss something? Am I not keeping my children safe? We're never letting them stay here again. All they ever do is judge us. So emotions and thoughts are connected. How this plays out is very different from, like, say I wasn't fazed by this. Say I didn't care, or my automatic thoughts were different from the start. I overheard this, and my immediate thought was like, wow, they care a lot about their grandkids. Like, wow, they're just trying to be helpful. Like, oh, that was harmless. Oh, you know what? Maybe I should put that thing away, right? Like if that was my automatic thought, my emotions would probably be appreciative. I'd be calm. There might be some level of like happy or like neutral, right? Very different response, but either way, emotions and thoughts are connected. Here's a kid friendly example. So say you are at school or you are at the playground, and you overhear kids whispering, laughing, and then looking at you as you walk by. The immediate thoughts that might go through your head are, they were laughing at me. They were for sure laughing at me. I shouldn't have come here. No one likes me. They're so mean. My clothes are embarrassing, right? It might be any level of thoughts like this, because the assumption you're making is that like they were definitely talking about me and making fun of me. And the emotions associated with that would be, you'd feel hurt, angry, you might be annoyed, embarrassed, you might be jealous, might be anxious. Those, if the thought at first was like, oh, they must be telling a really funny joke, oh, they must be having a good time, and that was the automatic thought or assumption, the emotions connected with that might be neutral, might be happy for them, you might be interested, and you might be curious about what's going on over there, but very different response. But again, emotions and thoughts connected to one another. The worksheet I have on the side here is our sprouting thoughts worksheet, which you'll get. It is just, this is like the starting point for all of this work, is like helping kids understand like our thoughts and our emotions are connected. Let's practice that. Let's look at some examples, and that's what's going to happen in this worksheet is, you know, our thoughts sprout up all day long. Some of these thoughts are unhelpful thoughts. Some of these thoughts are positive, happy, fine thoughts. But sometimes our thoughts become twisted like pesky weeds, and when these big emotions take over. So really the work is just connect the emotion to the thought. There are no real wrong answers. You know, many of these could have many emotions behind them. And this is to do together. I think with all the activities I'm going to show you, they're built for kids, but I think this work is important for all of us. And I think there's something really powerful in doing this with your child and sort of like figuring this out together, which helps, you know, like helps normalize this. Like, hey, we all go through this. We all have to work on this, and helps like you, by doing that, you are going to be modeling for your child. Like, okay, hey, how do I think about this? How can I problem solve around this? How can I think differently? So I think it's a great thing to do together. All right. So next, we're going to take a look at where do thoughts in general come from. There's more than is on this slide, but really this is a quick glimpse at like uncovering the roots. So we've already talked about emotions. And basically the point I'm making here is just that like the thoughts you have when you are excited, happy, thankful, those are different than the thoughts you have when you're calm. And those are different from the thoughts you have when you're worried or anxious, or sad or lonely or angry and resentful, right? All of those emotional states would lead to different sorts of thoughts going through your head. There is also something, and we won't really get into it here, but therapeutically, like in practice, we would also try to get to core beliefs. And this would be more advanced work, but this would be sort of getting at like, how are your thoughts influenced by the core, very ingrained way that you see yourself and understand the world and understand your relationships? And how do you understand your value, like your personal value? What do you think that is? And what about abilities and competence and safety and connection and like how lovable you are, right? Like these are some pretty like core things that we all have thoughts around and beliefs around, and it is through like that filter that we end up making interpretations about things, like assessing a situation, having like a certain perspective on something. So we won't get into it here, but that's just like also important to think about for all of us. All right, so now we're going to get into helpful versus unhelpful thoughts. And there are a few reasons to like start here and try to differentiate like what I'm just going to call a helpful and grounded thought versus an unhelpful, weedy thought. There might be different ways to like term those. But one piece is that when we think something, we tend to believe it. Like it is like a definite step to say like, whoa, I maybe can't trust that thought in my head. I might be thinking something and it might not be true. That's like a pretty big shift to make. Once you make it, I think it's easier to like continue to see it. But getting there the first time is a big deal. The other thing is that it is very hard to reflect on our thoughts. You have to be able to like recognize them, acknowledge them, step outside them, like look objectively at them and understand them and like evaluate them. Like that's a lot. That's pretty advanced. So I do think that connecting your thoughts to your behaviors, which again, they are connected, and going at it from the behaviors, like how did this thought impact my behavior, makes it a little easier because like your behaviors are tangible, like they are concrete things that happened and you can like evaluate the behavior. This either is or isn't how I want it to act. This is a choice I wish I didn't make, or I'm proud I made that choice, right? You can evaluate the behaviors a little easier. And then if you can connect the thought, like this thought led to this behavior, and then I either wanted or didn't want that behavior, it might be easier to go at it that way. In terms of like what we categorize as helpful grounded thoughts versus unhelpful weedy thoughts, I think this is a very personal thing. I have some examples here. I think this would be like, you might add different things to these lists. Your child might add different things to these lists. I think it's a very personal choice here. But what I have is helpful grounded thoughts really like help me make good decisions. They are rational or realistic. They allow me to figure something out and problem solve, and they encourage or motivate me to do something I care about. Unhelpful weedy thoughts might lead me to make a bad decision or act in a way I regret. They are irrational or unrealistic. They might prevent me from figuring something out or solving a problem, and they might prevent me from doing something I care about or think is important. The example I'm going to use here is like, say your child, like they really love soccer. They love soccer so much. They play all the time and they're trying out for a team. Like maybe this is the first team they're trying out for. And it's really anxiety provoking. They're really worried and they're thinking a lot about like, I'm not good enough. What if I'm not good enough? There are other really good players out there. Like, I'm not going to make it. I'm going to embarrass myself, right? They're having these sorts of like anxious, worried thoughts like cycle through their head. If the end thought here is, okay, I'm really worried, but I care a lot about this and this is really important to me and I'm going to give it a shot and I'm going to do my best. Like that's a helpful thought, right? Like they're going to follow through and try the thing that they care about versus the like, I can't do this. I know I'm not going to make the team anyways. I'm not even going to try. I can't try. They will, and because that thought would lead to the behavior of not going out there and not giving it a shot. And they might regret that later on, right? So that's one way to differentiate between the two types of thoughts. This little worksheet on the bottom, which you'll get the spot the weed activity, very basic of like, here are some examples, which ones are weeds, which ones are unhelpful thoughts. Talk about this. There might be different ways to interpret this. So again, this is a good thing to do together. All right, so we are now going to talk a little bit about the actual cognitive distortions. Like all the thoughts I've mentioned so far, if they've been on that like helpful, anxious, angry side of thinking, it was probably a certain type of a cognitive distortion. In cognitive behavioral therapy, like there is a list of cognitive distortions, and it is very long, and they are all named because these things are common. When I learned this information in grad school and I look at that list, like, it's like, that was helpful for me just to be like, wow, I do these things all the time. I have all these thinking patterns that impact me in like multiple areas of my life. So I think just that piece of like, hey, this is common, we all do this, is really validating and normalizing. And they all have like, they're named. They're so common that they're named. So we're going to get at some of the specific types of cognitive distortions. And again, we're going to call them weeds. These are the types of weeds. Little kid-facing definition. They tend to be negative, self-defeating thoughts. They're not always self-defeating. Sometimes they're like more directed at other people, but oftentimes they are self-defeating thoughts. They're like weeds in a garden. They get in our way. They prevent us from seeing things clearly. So one type of cognitive distortion, one type of weed is the mind-reading weed. The mind-reading weed sprouts up when you believe you know what someone else is thinking. They think I'm weird. She's mad at me. So anytime that you make that assumption that you know what someone is going on in someone else's brain, you know the thoughts they are having, you are mind reading because The reality is, unless they've told you what they're thinking, you do not know what they're thinking. This one, incredibly common. It happens like all the time, right? Negative filter weed. So this one sprouts up when you magnify the negative and ignore the positive. I still made mistakes. I messed everything up. So this would be, an example of this might be, say you were at like a gathering with friends, and if someone was watching you and the whole thing from the outside, they would say like, you had a great time, like you told a lot of funny jokes, people were laughing, like you got along with everyone had a good time together. And then you come home and all you can think about is like the one embarrassing thing you said, or the joke you made that like no one laughed at, right? You're very focused on like the one negative, or like the negative, and you're ignoring all the really positive things that happen. Like your brain won't let you see it. That's negative filter. Black and white weed. So this sprouts up when you view something as all or nothing. I never get picked. You always say no. The reality is like there's gray area to everything, and there might be different ways of thinking about this. Like not getting picked for something, like maybe you get picked when someone else is picking the teams, or maybe you have gotten picked before. It's just like you care a lot about this right now that you didn't get picked in this situation. But it's that like very concrete black and white, like this is always how this happens. Comparison weed sprouts up when you compare yourself to others. They're funnier than me, he's smarter than me. You're really focused on that comparison point. And oftentimes the way this will look is you overvalue other people and you undervalue yourself, or like whatever the quality is, like they are better at that, you are not as good at it, right? Like you're very focused on the comparison point. The other, if you probably noticed this, these ones do it the best. Comparison weed, these two leaves are different sizes. Mind reading weed, this weed is a brain. Trying to make this a little goofy, a little fun. One weed we didn't create, there are a few more we created. One we didn't create, but we should have, is catastrophizing. So this is like that kind of like doomsday spiraling that we can do when it's like this bad thing happened, like what if it continues to happen, like, or this is all going to turn out like the worst possible scenario is what's going to happen, right? I'm so worried about this, I care so much about this that I'm sure it's going to turn out badly, right? That sort of thinking is catastrophizing, and that's super common as well. Okay, and then on what I'm going to send you, there's again, like, oh, I want to be going backwards. Some worksheets around these types of weeds and trying to like find them, name them, connect them with a certain type of thought example that is given on the sheet. All right, so now we're going to talk about cognitive reframes, cognitive restructuring. We're going to call these our de-weeding tools. In general, I think like whether or not you can name the type of cognitive distortion that's happening, like doing that, yes, is important. But I think the most important thing is recognizing like, whoa, maybe there's a thought I'm having that may or may not be true, and I should check that. These de-weeding tools are not like, different ones are going to apply and work in different situations. And this is one of those things that's worth playing around with and learning and testing. These are different strategies. I'm going to just talk about my 3 favorites on here. And again, these are actual like cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive reframes that we've turned into like little garden tools. And one other thing I'll say about this before I get into the specifics. I mentioned before, like we believe our thoughts. It is a hard thing to have something you're so sure of in your head and then have to like force yourself to think like that might not be true. I'm thinking there might be a different way to think about this, right? Like that's hard work. And the reality is a lot of times, like it is so based in our emotions that we believe it. So that person was definitely thinking about me or like making fun of me. It's going to be really hard for me to believe that maybe they weren't. So this isn't necessarily like flipping your thought like into it was negative, now it's positive. It's more about pivots or like inserting doubt into the thought that you're having. We have a question coming in. I just want to see if it's okay. So I do have, okay, this is appropriate right now. Yeah. How common are cognitive distortions for kids on a daily basis, a couple times a day, hourly, almost always? I'm sure that this differs by age. Also, just wondering what is most common. It's a great question. The answer is going to be like, it depends on the child. Cognitive distortions are definitely more common and like more connected with anxiety and depression, right? So if you have a child who is struggling with those sorts of feelings, that is really going to influence how they think and how often they, like, these sorts of cognitive distortions pop up for them. It is really person dependent. Another thing to keep in mind, and this is actually as we get at like the reframes and practicing these strategies, so much of this is habit formation. So like the more I think in this way, the more I jump to having automatic thoughts that are negative in some way, or I assume people are like out to get me in some way or don't like me, the more I think like that, the more I'm going to think like that, because my brain is getting trained to think like that. And which is why, especially at the beginning, like it is important to practice the reframes and like practice inserting the doubt, inserting other possibilities into this. And it's going to take time. But like, again, this is skill building. This takes practice. That doesn't fully answer the question about how common, but it does get at that, like the longer you've thought like this, probably the more common these sorts of thoughts are in your everyday life. Okay, so let's look a little bit at the reframes. So the first, and I love this one so much, is fact checking. Do I know this thought is true? What evidence do I have? This one is like, when you sit down and do that, like it is really powerful. So again, just going to use mind reading as the example. Those kids were laughing at me on the playground. Do I know this is true? Like they might have been laughing at you, right? But like, do I know they were laughing at me? What evidence do I have that they were, right? Make yourself do the work of checking the facts for yourself. Possibility play. This one, again, is a really good one. Are there other ways of thinking about this? Come up with two alternatives. So, okay, they might have been laughing at me, but maybe they were laughing at a funny joke they heard, or maybe they were just really happy, right? Like force yourself to think of the other possibilities. You might not believe them. You might still believe your initial thought, but force your brain to make that step and think of the other possibilities. That in itself, even if you don't believe it, that in itself is a little bit of like changing like how your brain is going to make these interpretations. The other one I'll talk about is find the feeling. I find this one really helpful for me, like as an adult, in thinking about, is the thought I'm having based on a feeling? What am I feeling? So if I'm really worried about something, really angry about something, and I'm stuck on a certain thought that reflects that, recognizing, okay, I'm anxious, I'm angry, I can't necessarily trust my thoughts right now, and I'm definitely not in the right emotional state or state of mind to like make a decision. I need to take a step back. I need to come back to this because I know it is really based in my emotional state right now. It also, like, for me, helps me catch like, okay, it means I care a lot about this. This is really important to me in some way. And so it's just like, it's a little bit of self-awareness building as well. This other one, phone a friend. This kind of gets at like, sometimes you can't get out of a thought. Like sometimes it is really hard and you might just need to talk to someone. Like you might just need to go find someone, have them help you with this, or do something to kind of pull you out of that thinking pattern. So that gets a little more now into not like doing the reframe, but engaging in a coping skill. So like, I can't stop thinking about this. I'm really stuck. Let me go talk to someone, or let me go for a walk. Let me go take a break. Let me go do something else to like behaviorally to change where I'm stuck mentally right now. Okay, getting back to this being skill building and this taking practice. There's like some work in testing the tools, playing around with them, seeing which ones work for you and which ones work in different situations. This is a worksheet that I think is really, really, really important to do together and like talk about it with your child, because there are like lots of different ways to interpret these things. And like, like lots of different fact checking scenarios to play out there, and possibility plays. Like you could do a lot of fun stuff with this, and not everything's going to work for every situation. I think about this as being pretty similar to how in Mightier, like kids have different calming skills that work for them. Like some kids are like, I do deep breathing all the time. That is my thing. And that, like, that's my coping strategy. That's my calming skill. And then other kids are like, I will never do deep breathing. Don't like it. But they might do progressive muscle relaxation, or they might do something else that, I don't know, is like not one of the strategies we teach, right? But they have figured a way out, a way to bring their heart rate down. So lots of like testing, experimenting, and learning about what works for you. Okay. And then, because we need to make sure we bring a leveling into everything, this is going to be Sluggo. There's a little write-up about Sluggo. So if you've been getting, seeing the skill packs that we've started doing recently, we started expanding the leveling bios. These units that we're doing, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them at the end, we're expanding those bios even more. So, you know, maybe you see yourself in Sluggo a little bit, like maybe you can relate to Sluggo a little bit. So Sluggo is a caring leveling who always thinks of others. This makes him a good listener and a great friend, but sometimes Sluggo has weeds in his garden. He cares so much about what others think that sometimes he gets stuck worrying that other levelings don't like him. So I think a lot of kids have had that experience. The two activities attached to Sluggo are, there's this little comic, and it's just like finish the comic at the beginning of it, a little drawing activity at the beginning of this, like Sluggo, he's really down. He's having some sort of thought that is not helpful, making, you know, he's feeling really badly, but by the end, he's feeling better. What happened here? What was the situation? You know, get creative with that, play around with it. This could be really fun for kids, but also, again, if you do this also, you know, you're going to have your own little Sluggo story. And that could be a fun sharing thing, you know, for everyone to kind of share what Sluggo went through. And then this little garden plot here, this is just a little game board. There are cards that you'll cut out that go with this. You need to help Sluggo get across the garden. You'll play this with a partner. You know, multiple people could play this. Cognitive distortions will hold you back, and de-weeding tools will move you forward. So no work here other than conveying like cognitive distortions get in our way, de-weeding tools help us. And then you just kind of play it out. Okay. And then the last thing, let me just check. All right. Okay. The last, the last exercise that I'm going to share. So is thought tracking and reflection. This sheet I have here is like a very standard cognitive behavioral therapy thought record. In therapy, like if someone was telling me like they're struggling with their mood, they're struggling with their thoughts, we would do this. We would break this down. We'd go step by step, do this chain analysis of like, all right, what was the situation? What was the automatic thought you had in that situation? How did you feel? Now we're going to challenge that thought, test it. What's your evidence that that thought is true? What's your evidence against that thought? Can you come up with an alternative thought? And what's the outcome? Do you believe that alternative thought? Do you not? What do you feel now? What will you do? Right? So really intensive, like step by step. This is designed for adults. Like this isn't designed for kids. Like this is, there are a lot of steps here. You have to like really focus and like walk it through. And I think like I wouldn't really expect someone to do this like outside of a therapy session, or if you're like doing it on your own and like really thinking intensely about it, you could do that as well. But so we do have a different like a lighter version that we made that like is your garden log. And this really just gets at like, it could be any type of situation, not necessarily negative. Let's just work on building the connection between things happen. I feel a certain way about them. I have a certain thought about them. Those thoughts could be helpful or unhelpful. And if they're unhelpful, I could use a tool. What tool could I use? So just kind of like gets you to walk through step by step, but allows for the possibility of like, no, there's great things that happen sometimes, and I feel really happy, and like I have these sorts of helpful, positive thoughts, right? Like that's also important in building just pure awareness of our thoughts and how they work. So I'm going to share this out as well. And then I think that is, yeah, I think that is, if there are any questions, feel free to pop them in here. I'm going to, so I'm going to share, let me show you this. For everyone who is registered, I'm going to share the link to this recording out in case you're interested in it again. I'll probably do that tomorrow. And I'm also going to share, so this is this packet. You're going to get this packet. This is our weeds in the garden unit. This was designed actually initially for schools, for teachers to use in the classroom with students, or for counselors to use in a group setting with students. So there is a school version of this. And if you are a teacher or a counselor and you're interested in this, please email me and I will send you the version that has like the teacher facing setup instructions. But this is like we turn this into like a family facing version. So it does have like the research and the overview for parents, but then also it's just gonna like everything I showed you here. There, little, well, you can't see that so well, little worksheets. And there's the write-up on here is kid facing. So you can, I say, do this with your child, really do this together, like as if you're not like you're coaching them through it, right? Like you're figuring this out together, go about it that way. But it does take some of that educational pressure off of you. And like, these should kind of handle like what's being done. So you'll get that pack, a link to that, to download that tomorrow when I email as well. And if you have any questions, comments, or requests for future topics, future workshops, definitely email me, let me know, because we do want to continue these sorts of topics on a regular basis, and really providing additional resources for families to use in your, things to use in your home with your child to kind of explore some element of emotional awareness or self-awareness or emotional regulation. So if you have requests, please let me know. And I see one question coming in. How do you know when to choose neurofeedback or other reframing tools versus play therapy? It's a pretty, let me see, there's a lot in that question. So, okay, so one thing I think has to do with this question, how do you know when to choose neurofeedback or other reframing tools versus play therapy? So neurofeedback is going to be pretty specifically about, like there's the monitoring piece, right? Like Mightier is biofeedback, heart rate being monitored, and the game responding to your heart rate. So to your emotional state, right? Neurofeedback is going to get it like brain waves and like, so where are you focusing? Like, are you paying attention? Like things like that, right? Reframing tools, a lot about the practice. So specifically for like what we talked about today, reframing tools are often used when like your thoughts are causing you difficulties in some way. You're struggling with cognitive distortions, you're struggling with negative thinking, and you have to practice the reframing tools. There's an engagement layer to all of these things. So, and it kind of depends on how things are presented and how your child will engage. So one thing I think about a lot with how Mightier works, the video doesn't necessarily right now ask kids to talk about their emotions or think about their emotions. It's a game, right? Like the mechanic of working on calming down and practicing calming strategies is wrapped up in your gameplay. That's a pretty specific way of engaging kids versus talking about emotions, right? Or talking about how like calming strategies that work for you, or this, like what we went through today, right? That's a very different approach. There might be kids who are like, I'm not doing this. I can't do this. Like, I don't like this. And there might be kids that are fine with it, right? So I think engagement matters a lot. And that's just going to come down to like doing what you think is best for your child and what you think is the right approach for them. and sometimes seeing how they respond to different approaches as well. Okay, I think that was the only question. So yeah, feel free to send anything else, any other thoughts my way. And I appreciate you all so much for joining. Thank you so much.